Good morning, everybody. I know a lot of you, but those of you who don't know me, I'm Travis Rokey. I've been with NutraDrip for 8 years now. I grew up in this area, started with Kurt during high school and college, the automation, service and install as well. The last 3 years now I've been in Southwest Missouri. Lamar is the name of the town, doing sales and install and some of the controller work as well. I started out in the probes pretty early on. I labeled the name of my presentation Continuous Root Zone Management. I could have put soil moisture probes up there, but when I think about soil moisture probes, it doesn't really bring warm, fuzzy feelings. If any of you guys have used probes, you probably know why. They're a piece of technology that you tend to run into problems or have issues with, or they're wear out in the field, so things can go wrong. Mice can chew wires, combines are a magnet to them, sprayers. We're trying to get away from that, and we found some great technology to do that, and I'm going to dive into the importance of monitoring the roots, what's going on below the soil, what we can't see. Like Kurt said, the Irrigation technology is a great technology for seeing broad field analytic, what's going on in the field, whereas moisture probes are like the microscope to what's going on right there in that one location. What are my roots doing? What's the moisture doing? How is my irrigation performing there? And then you can use that information and then extrapolate it over your field, your watch. This is a graph of moisture uptake by a corn crop through its growing season. So starting out really using no water around emergence, and then peak water use, tassel time, reproduction, and then the root development is with that. So a lot of our irrigation systems are along the application rate of irrigation systems are in the uptake. So a lot of our drip systems are designed at that 0.26, a little over a quarter of an inch of water. That's what we're able to put on a day. If that's the case for your irrigation system, some are less than that, some are more than that. But during that high uptake time for water, there's a point that irrigation system can't keep up. So you're relying a lot on your soil moisture and even that deep moisture. So knowing where your roots are at, how big is your tank? How big of an area can you pull water from? The key components that moisture probe can tell us. We'll dive into some of the data here after a while. As this slide shows, there's that 20% of yield, that top end yield can come from that deep water or that extra water. You have roots there to get it. If the roots aren't there, you really don't want to make the plant grow roots deeper, put its energy into roots. You get that water, because if you want that energy going into grain, because that's what you get paid for, you don't get paid for a massive root system. So being able to monitor that is again, why focus on this root zone? The plant's strength or nutrition, so it has to come in with water through the roots. So having adequate moisture, having the moisture at the right spot, the plant can successfully do that. An optimal soil moisture in your soil is going to help drive your biology and make that as most efficient as possible, so that biology can free up nutrients, get the most out of what's in your soil. So the right amount of water at the right time makes money. There's a lot of research that goes into your nutrients, N, P, and K, but really that's only 4% of what the plant uses. The other 96% are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon, so water and food source for microbes and all that. So we really need to focus on that area because that's where 96% of our yield comes from. Most of the time, the good Lord takes care of that for us with rain, sunshine, the whole ecosystem of biology, but being able to support that system is beneficial. So going a little bit into the hardware, like I said, the more things we have in the field, the more problems we're going to have. And if you guys were here last year, some of the technology we're using is the Go Guru probe. This is the unit that goes below ground. It's a capacitance probe, goes 3 feet in the ground. This is the little battery and transmission unit. All of this is completely underground. I got another picture of it as well. That's installed. There's nothing you can farm right over the top of it. A lot of times we're putting it at the depth of the drip tape. Either you don't have any tillage down there, if it's on a pivot or any other irrigation. You just want to install it below the probe or below your tillage. Trent's bringing the unit that sticks above ground. So this wirely transmits to the Fox, and that can be easily pulled out of the field, make your planter pass over the top, stick it back in the ground, continues collecting data. Or you have a tillage pass, pull it out of the ground, stick it back in. That's all buried, so it takes care of the wire damage from rodents and equipment. In that box is a battery. I think the oldest one they have is 5 years, and it's still got a couple years of battery life left. So they're predicting 5 to 7 years of battery life from that unit. There it is installed next to a drip line. Um, when we install these on drip lines, we want to dig it up, expose it, and find where that water's coming out, where the emitter's at. So it's not too close, it's not overwatering, or too far away, it looks like we're dry. So having it in that same spot every year, the exact spot, same spot, based from that emitter, you can start to build a database of how that soil responds to that water that you're irrigating, how it's reacting with the soil around it. And then if you just have 1 year of disturbing the soil, you're not doing that every year, so soil has time to heal data. So this is just an example of a capacitance probe, what you're seeing there with the green cap. Every few inches along that probe, there's a sensor. Each of those sensors reading the moisture level at that depth. We got a little example of what it would show us. I wanted to be able to make a clear panel of dirt and drip the water, and you can see how the water moves through the dirt, but instead I just got a paper towel and a bottle of water with just blue food coloring in it. In this example, if this is my dirt, a paper towel would represent what a sandy soil, how sandy soil would act. The water quickly absorbs it and runs through it. You also see the capillary action of the soil pull the water out. So what I want to show here is, this was my probe. It's going to show what's actually happening. Obviously, if this is underground, you can't see what's going on unless you have a probe. So as I start to water, if this is my drip tape underground, buried, as I start to put water on, you'll start to see, in this example, you'll see where that water goes. I squirt it on. Obviously, this would be a really fast irrigation. That water, I was spraying it on that dot. The capillary action pulled it up. You're starting to see a lot of it go down as well. With a probe, it's reading my moisture at each of these depths. So I could tell how far my water went up. I can tell how far it went down. If I just let the system on and let it run, it just started really overwatering. That water's going to go down past the roots. So that's a waste of water. So having a moisture probe to tell you this is key. That's how we can understand every soil type is going to respond different to irrigation. So the NutraDrip team, we can't really tell you, oh yeah, you need to run 5 hours, you need to run 4 hours, you need to put a quarter of inch on. We don't really know that until we know how the soil reacts to your water you're putting on. Even water quality makes a difference on how the soil soaks up that moisture. If you had patience and we wanted to sit here and just slowly drip the water on this paper towel, more of it would go up versus going down. Clay, we had a clay layer in here that's going to change how that water runs through here. Again, without having a probe, it's hard to know actually what's going on. And similarly, if you have a pivot or a rain, the water's coming down from the top. How is it soaking through the soil? Some layers it may go through faster, some slower. But back to my picture up here, each of those lines tells us how much moisture we had, how much moisture made it to that depth. So just a brief summary of a graph of what it's actually showing us. Classic stair-step action. During the day, plant's using water, it dries down. During the night, the plant is resting, so it levels out, back down again for another day. I use this as a heart rate monitor for the plant, if you will, or measuring its pulse. If it's really drinking hard, you can tell it's healthy, it's doing what it's supposed to. There's moisture there that it can use. We start seeing that line, that drop down, that plant has stress. It's not drinking what it should. If you're working hard and building up a sweat and really working, and you're going to be thirsty, your body's going to want water. Same with a plant. It's going to be pulling that water. So watching those stair steps is key. Sometimes you'll see at night, that'll actually come back up. That's the water moving up from deeper levels up through the soil. These spikes are wetting events, so an irrigation or rainfall. Like you can see this spike happened here, so we made it about 1, 2, 3, 4.5 days before that amount of water was used up by the plant. So if this was your irrigation event, you put on 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch, made it 3 days or 4 days. That's how long that water lasted. Root depth, like I said, watching the roots is key. So each of these lines is a different depth, shallow to deep. You can see when that stair step started happening, you had root activity there. So early in the season, we're up at these shallow sensors. As the season went on, our roots were active deeper. You can also look at the depth of infiltration. So when you had a wetting event, which sensor was affected, which sensor spiked. Again, later in the season, you can see that water was making it deeper. Obviously, because it was drier, there was room for that water to go. Just a quick story, I had a customer down in southwest Missouri. He was, at that time, just a lead. I was talking to him about drip irrigation. He was really liked the idea, liked the technology of drip irrigation. But I have 2 pivots. I've been farming them for 25, 30 years. There's a lot of years that the corners are out yielding the pivot. I have all the water I need. I can just pump that water on, and nothing's changing. He's like, I need help managing this. I don't want to put it and spend all this money on drip irrigation and not pay just like my pivots. So we started out this past year, was the first year we installed these permanent moisture probes. We started watching it through the season. He irrigated like he normally did. We were hot and dry, unlike here last year. And I was watching his graphs, and the water kept being used up and used up. So I called him up. I'm like, hey, are you irrigating? Are you running your pivot? Is it working? Yeah, every 3 to 5 days, that pivot's making it over that probe, and he's putting on 6/10. This was his graph from last year. Installed it there in April, all the way through October. But it just kept dropping. And we've got a problem. If you're putting on 6/10, you'd think it would be doing something. If you looked really close, there's a few instances in here where it's leveled out. That uptake wasn't as steep. But since this probe is buried down, I think we buried it 10 inches, that 6/10 of an inch was only getting soaked up in that top little bit. Here's a rain event, and it should have seen a spike from this inch rain. It slowed down the uptake, obviously just a little bit, but the water was not making it very far into the soil. So I went out there after his pivot made a pass, and that water was only soaking in 2 to 3 inches. The rest was running off. We learned really quick we had a water infiltration issue. He had pulled soil samples. We had looked at a water test. Everything came back pretty good. Bicarbonates weren't that high. Sodium really wasn't an issue. Greg's going to talk more later. When we sent him to the lab, and the lab combined the water and the soil together, we got up with a whole bunch of issues. Basically, that soil was sealing up, and it wasn't letting the water soak down. So this year, we're going to try some different amendments to see if we can't get that to soak in. And look at each of those sensors through the same year on that same project. See that each of these levels, it sucked moisture from these top 2, it dried out, and the roots kept going deeper, and that rain event never made it down to that sensor. Just a quick look at, if we have a permanent probe, have 4 years worth of data from this one. I think it's a corn soybean rotation from 19 to 22, and you can see during the season irrigation, and then during the off season what's actually happening to that moisture. You could tell after soybeans 20 and 22 that the soybeans dried the soil out a lot more than corn, or we ended the year a lot drier. So in instances like in Texas, or when you don't get enough rainfall over the winter and spring, doing pre-irrigation would be a big deal. Back to that last story I talked about, that farmer had 2 different pivots, 2 different probes. The one probe shows the soil profile. They're less than a mile apart. The one probe shows a full soil profile, and the other one, the bottom 2 sensors, are still dry, still bone dry from the summer. And we've had several inches of rain. So again, that kind of went back to prove our theory that that water is not able to soak in like it should. We suffer from really tight clay pan. The CECs of the soil are like 10 or less. But as you go down about 12 inches, and we get to a really tight clay. Just a lot you can learn from how the moisture interacts with the soil. This is just a snapshot of what it would look like if you had seasonally installed probes. If you just were looking at the growing season, there's a lot of data you're missing in that in-between period. So how does this data make me money? I shared one instance where it may. Obviously, they can help you save water or prevent you from overwatering or underwatering, lose yield from that. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you can optimize the soil moisture to optimize your biology that's in the soil. Evaluate new practices or treatments. Like I said, at one field we knew we needed to work on water infiltration. So there's different products out there that we haven't really tried a lot of. So it's hard to tell a farmer, okay, you need to spend $50 an acre on this product to help your water infiltrate. We can just try a little bit of it, and if that affects the moisture level on our moisture probes, it's working. If it doesn't, it's not working, so we can stop and try something else. So that's how you can use it to evaluate practices or treatments. I got some more data we'll go in just a little bit deeper into here in a second. Yeah, knowing if your treatment was successful before you run the combine before it's all said and done. And this is that graph being able to show us, did the rainfall soak in, how much of it went in. The rain gauge shows an inch, how much of that inch made it into the dirt available for my plant. So this is a graph from a probe actually just here down the road. Some local data from last year. Again, this same permanent installed probe. You can see, obviously you guys had a wet year, so a lot of rain events during the growing season. We had good root activity all the way down at the 40-inch sensor. You can see right here, for instance, we're pulling moisture from all levels. Either this rain event, that water soaked all the way down to 40 inches. So that's what I like to see. I like to see that water soaking in. I like to see roots pulling it out, because if it's pulling moisture down from all the way from 0 to 40 inches, it has access to all those nutrients as well. This another graph of the water moving through the soil. Actually, this was that probe I talked about that this is data from 2 days ago. That's when I pulled it. We're still dry at those bottom two sensors. Even though we've had a lot of soaking rains, it's starting to raise it up just a little bit. But you can see back here in November, December, a lot of those rain events were only making it down 30. Is my soil profile full? This was the one probe that wasn't that far away from the one that wasn't full. All its sensors are back in that wet period. This is that other sensor a mile away, still showing dry. This little blip here on that shallow 12-inch sensor was back when we had that really cold snap back February, first part of February, where that frost depth actually got 12 inches, and when it freezes, the probe's perfectly fine. It just can't read the soil moisture correctly, so that's why I get that blip. You can tell where the frost level is. You start getting a goofy value. This was something really interesting that when I was digging through this data this winter, I was under the assumption that if it's hot and dry, that's going to force that plant to grow its roots deeper and deeper to find moisture. And I think that is true in some cases, but I've seen this happen multiple times on the probes down by me. We've seen it really all across the country, where you can see the roots are pulling out moisture from the shallow sensors, 12 and 16 inches. We have a rain event on June 11th. All of a sudden, we start pulling moisture from that next, like as soon as that rain event happened, we've seen activity from roots deeper. This kind of went to show that having optimal soil moisture, and that's not too much water, that's having just the right amount of water, it encourages root growth. That the plant is healthy, and it's able to send its energy into growing roots deeper. So I want to really focus on growing roots at the beginning of the season. Like Kurt mentioned, the different hybrids, how they responded to different management, tied back to what the root structure was. A plant with a massive root structure, it has the ability to receive nutrients, feed microbes, sugars, so in return it gets more nutrients. This is an example of at the beginning of the season. We started out, the plants started using moisture, those graphs started dropping. The plants showed stress, so he kicked his irrigation system on. You can see, I mean, it ran solid, really never turned it off because it was hot and dry out. The plants looked like they had stress, but really we were adding more stress. Never got roots down to that 24-inch sensor. So we had roots this big. I mean, how much of a corn crop can you grow off of roots this big, that deep? It wasn't until the end of the season when he shut his irrigation system off that those roots grew down deeper, that 24-inch range. That's really when that plant should have been filling the grain versus growing roots. We can also look at this information and be, okay, when should I stop? When can I be done irrigating? I don't want to overwater and have a wet field to combine in, but I don't want to hurt my yield and shut off too soon. You can see where your roots are at, how much soil and water does that plant have access to, and then how much is available in that. So see, the last irrigation event, that plant still using water, which is a good thing. You want it to be able to pull out the moisture from the ground, but you don't want to hurt the yield, and you can lose test weight by not having enough water there. This is just another example, like I had mentioned, being able to evaluate treatments. This was actually data from Texas. They were using a water structuring device, and again, they were able to see differences in how that water soaked in, different from the control. These are two pivots side by side. One had the water structuring unit, the other one did not. There's different water additives you can add, surfactants. David Pudick, his APSA 80, you probably see similar results as well. But and being able to evaluate that during the season is something you can do with these probes. So that was a lot of data, and it takes a lot of time to dig through all that. And nobody wants to wake up on a hot summer day and pull up their computer and spend an hour digging through that. You want to look at your phone. They also show the last wetting event, whether it was irrigation or rainfall. How deep did that water go? It's really handy. Quick, pull it up, take a quick look. They have different algorithms for different crops. Some of the major ones, corn and soybeans, obviously use. On the website, you have a map. You can drop pins where they're at, so you can see, give you a visual reference where those probes are at. And again, color-coded, what the moisture level is of them. They also have irrigation templates, so you want to keep that line in the green, adding all those sensors in that 3-foot range, summing them all up into one line, kind of giving you an average of where that is. Obviously, keeping it in the green is where we want it. So that was a lot of information on our Go Guru option, the permanently installed probe. We do have some other ones to fit everybody's needs. The permanent installed probes. In Grow Guru, we do have a Centec probe. That's the actual capacitance probe that goes in the ground, and then we're using this Sensio telemetry, where we're actually burying that probe in the ground at the depth of the drip tape, and then burying a wire to the edge of the field. So there's no hardware in the field. Grow Guru, and it's a permanent probe, 5 to 7 year battery life. Like you've seen on those graphs and their app and stuff, it's very insightful of what's going on just at a glance. So I really like that part of it. Have different crops in there that like the difference between cotton and corn, of how they pull out water, it takes that into consideration. Well, this picture is the one downfall. You still have to remove this, and this particular farmer farmed around this, and he's not going to get any good data off of that, because where his probe's at, there's no roots there. So we're pulling this out of the field is key. The pricing structure they have set up, the hardware as a service agreement. So the first year, pay the $2,300 basically for the hardware, but then after that, for as long as you maintain the subscription, it's $1,400 a year every year after that. If that battery's dead, they send you a new unit, no cost. It's all covered under warranty for the rest, as long as you pay this $1,400 a year. They will not cover it if it goes to the combine. They did say that, so I've had some come close, but it's all PVC, so it's not too good on equipment. The Centec option, again, it's a permanent probe, but there's no in-field hardware, but it will tie into our Galcon controllers and eventually tie into our NetFM controllers. There is hardware at the edge of the field, but it goes by our valves, or it's out of the way by a fence. It has a telemetry unit that reports back to a base station, so it does have a few more parts outside of the field. This one, you buy the hardware up front, $1,500 for the hardware that's in the field, the probe and the telemetry unit. You got $500 for a base. You can have unlimited probes on that base as long as you're within a couple mile range. Since it takes a little bit more for the install, you got a little more. This is a one-time install price per probe, and the subscription is really low cost. Basically, they're paying for a cellular subscription. The annual probe, AquaSpy, had this one around a while. It's a good probe, it's good information, but again, it's got a lot of parts and pieces, so there's a lot of things that can go wrong. We got wires, we got a solar panel, got this post, you got to stay charged, got to stay above the canopy. So there's just lots of parts and pieces that can go wrong. But they have a really good crop-specific user interface, really similar to Grow Guru. Actually, the agronomist I was with AquaSpy for a lot of years is the same agronomist now with Grow Guru. A lot of his knowledge built into the tool. That's nice. AquaSpy, they do a 3-year contract. They want you to pay for 3 years, $670 a year, and that covers the subscription, that covers the hardware. If something goes wrong, they're covering it under warranty. But then again, you have that $300 install cost every year for us to come put it in, and we're only getting that short amount of data. Soiltech Wireless, so this is a new one. It's a 1-sensor unit. It's a robust brick, basically, where you plastic brick. You can bury it, put the soil back over, and it's measuring soil depth only at 1 depth, but it's really easy to install. So a farmer can do it himself, buying the hardware, $560, and $100 a year for the subscription. So those are the main options. Obviously, you have probes that we sold you in the past, we're still supporting those, just not promoting them because we found better technologies and want you to be as successful as possible. With that, I think that's pretty much all I have. So if there's any questions, let me know.